best way to start this is to frame it with a definition. So Jackie, I'm going to go to you first. What is gender lens investing?
So thank you so much. And I actually am going to start with saying what it's not, because I think there's lots of myths and misperceptions and impact, but in gender, they all get exacerbated. Gender lens investing is not small, soft, and pink. And that's oftentimes what we think, right? This is small funds investing in micro entrepreneurs. We're not thinking about State Street and CalSTRS launching an ETF. We think it's soft. It's like a feel-good, invest if there's a lot of women in the room, as opposed to rigorous analysis of multiple different elements of data. And we also think it's pink. We think it's investing for women. In fact, when my co-author and I went to write the book, we talked to a publisher. They said, books for women about investing don't sell. And we said, that's great, because we're not writing one of those. So we think gender lens investing is smart investing. If you want to talk about specifically what it is, it's that deliberate or that intentional, to use the words of this morning, integration of gender-based data into financial analysis with the expectation of finding additional opportunities and uncovering and mitigating risks.
Okay, could you give us maybe one concrete example just to set us running?
Well, the other thing that's important to know is there is not one way of doing gender lens investing. There's not one lens. So to go on the concrete example front, some gender lens investors will use the lens that DBL used, that was mentioned a number of times this morning, right? The female founder or the founding of a diverse team and the benefit of that. Other gender lens investors will look across the value chain of a company. And they'll say from the board, and there's lots of statistics, you can look at Credit Suisse, 23% higher return on equity for companies with 3 or more women on their board, right? From the board all the way through the supply chain, which are the companies that are best integrating elements of womenomics and full inclusion into their business models. And then finally, there's one other model of looking at the product and service. So which companies are fully integrating the element of products that work for all of us, products that make a better world and solve problems that may disproportionately affect women and girls?
Okay, terrific. Well, now if I can come to Erika and then to Ron, the extent to which this is part of your life right now. So do you use the gender lens, and in what ways? So Erika first and then Ron.
Yeah, it very much is part of our lives as a firm. And one thing I'll say is that this also, I mentioned governance earlier. This is an issue of governance, because when you are governed well, you know the facts and the empirical evidence that diversity is a better way to make decisions. And I do want to say that that's, a lot of times that's said, people throw that out there, including executives, just throw it out there, and frankly, they have no idea what they're saying, all right, because it's hard to do. So if you think about diversity, this is a study from, I think it's Catherine Rogers at Columbia, and she studied diversity. And she showed empirically that diverse groups make better decisions, which that we've got loads of, we don't need that. But what she also showed is that in these diverse groups, external to them, they are looked at as being highly dysfunctional, all right? And what's interesting is inside the groups themselves, they perceive themselves as highly dysfunctional. Meanwhile, we know these groups are making better decisions. So this kind of non-intuitive analysis shows that diversity is painful, it's messy, but it works. And so within organizations, again, when you go deep and understand that the issue of the number of women on boards or the number of women on executive teams, that's not enough, right? That's critical, it's easy to count, but it's not enough. So it really does go to a firm's deep understanding and culture of appreciating diversity. And definitionally, completely agree. I mean, you nailed it in terms of what you have to look at. It goes to that issue of deep integration and governance.
But as a research analyst, how do you identify that deep culture of diversity?
It is a matter of asking questions, as with most research, right? It's always about asking questions, and a great question simply leads to the next question, and a great piece of research simply leads to the best piece of research. And when someone comes to you and says, I have all the answers, I know it all, well, frankly, they're either lying or stupid, because you can never know it all. You just have to go deep and really look at what's going on in terms of processes and programs and culture.
Yeah. Ron, from your perspective, gender lens in investing, is that something you do?
Yeah, so I kind of come to this conversation from the perspective of an asset owner. 11 years ago, I sold an investment management business. My wife, Marty, who's here today with me, and I started our family foundation. We'd been very focused on philanthropy that she had been leading for about 20 years in our family around women and girls. So it made sense for us that our philanthropic focus in the foundation would be women and girls. We kind of began to fall into impact investing in 07, 08, before that term, and certainly before the gender lens term had ever been coined. We began to make investments that were consistent with our mission. And as we began to learn about gender lens investing, it was about the time that we started to move our portfolio 100% to impact. And so we really challenged ourselves, and more importantly, our wealth manager, the investment management firms we were working with, to bring us gender lens strategies across asset classes. And so just 4 quick examples. If I look at 4 big boxes: public debt, public equity, private debt, private equity, we have gender lens investments in all of those. So on the public debt and equity side, Breckenridge, for example, a Boston-based fixed income manager, has a gender lens strategy where they look at about 17 different particular attributes, along with all of the traditional financial attributes. Trillium Asset Management, very similarly on the public equity side, using many of the same things that were talked about here. And then on the private side, both debt and equity. So we were an early core investor in the Women's World Banking Capital Fund, which is an investment in microfinance, mostly women at kind of the recipient end of those loans. But what we loved about Women's World Banking is that it's infused with women leadership throughout the entire value chain. The organizations themselves are led by women, the boards are led by women, and the portfolio manager of the fund is a woman, which for someone who's been in the investment business for 30 years, I'm still chagrined by this extraordinarily small percentage of portfolio managers, both on the public and private side, that are women.
Despite their outperformance.
Yes, despite their significant outperformance in many cases. And then in public debt, we have an individual investment in a jewelry manufacturer based in Nairobi, 2 extraordinary female entrepreneurs. We've syndicated with some other foundations some working capital financing to provide their supply chain, primarily women artisans, with the type of working capital that they need. So I think maybe to underscore what Jackie just said, there's no one particular flavor to gender lens investing. It's not, sometimes people will say to me, well, gender lens investing, so that's this ETF. Well, it's like saying impact investing, that's this microfinance fund. It's part of it, but it is much broader. And what we found is challenging the firms that we work with to bring us gender lens strategies has caused many of them to think about this area in a way that they haven't before. And we hope that we can be kind of part of the field building process there.
So you made mention of the fact that there are very few female investment managers, and I want to sort of broaden that out and ask about the roadblocks to the adoption of gender lens investing. And I guess there are 2 elements to this. One is kind of within the corporate landscape, behaviors have to change, and the other is investors have to think differently about things. And so could each of you pick out what the roadblocks are to this mainstreaming word that we're using throughout the day of that kind of mindset? Perhaps we'll go Erika, then Jackie, then Ron.
Well, I think it's actually, and we've talked about research and analytics, and I think it's actually simply empathy. I mean, there are so many, seems to me, so many financial advisors that, have clients that don't feel heard, right? I think we talked about this a little bit before, but if you're not feeling your client, if you're not listening, that's a huge roadblock. And if you talk to the folks at the Athena Institute, or we manage the money for the Ms. Foundation for Women, and if you talk to these asset owners and advisors, there really is a mismatch in language. And I think that I don't like to make generalizations typically, but I would argue that women are particularly good at parallel processing. at multitasking. And so when you're talking to someone who's really multitasking, it does need to be a different conversation. And so I think there really is a roadblock in terms of sensitivity and empathy. The good part about that particular roadblock is, we really can together holistically raise consciousness and fix it. Thinking about examples, successes, there's a lot of role models out there. It's just a matter of time, because changing behavior, it does take time. But I think it might be as simple as that.
Jackie?
So maybe three things to pick up on Erika's first. It is a different conversation, and I was talking to someone in the hall before, a question of, is there demand for gender lens products? The research is that 50% of women in America are not satisfied with their relationship with their advisor. And 50% of women in America would like to invest in gender diverse companies. So if the advisor is confident in saying, I think that this is a strong investment, and the track records are important here, right? We won at US Trust a Women and Girls Equality Strategy. Having a 3-year track record where we've outperformed the S&P 1500 is important for advisors to be able to have that conversation of empathy and confidence, but to be able to say, is this something that's important to you? Who was saying before, protesting is the new brunch? There were a few people out with pink hats on, and some of them actually want to do something. And so there is the first issue of a different conversation. Mm-hmm. The second issue is real in terms of data. So while the data is better, it is not yet universal and deep. And so the conversations that Erika is having need to continue. But as more companies report gender diverse data, we can move beyond what you would say counting women to really understanding that DNA. Mm-hmm. And the research is coming back strong again, not surprising, but that business case has to be made over and over and over again. Whoever said it on the first panel, right? We need to make the business case. And then I think the third piece is to embrace diversity of approaches here. So Ron, this aspect that there's not one approach, and some of the funds that we can talk about are gender mandate funds, right? That is their top line thesis. But others, it's just integrated in different ways, and starting to understand the power of having both mandate funds, looking to really change something, and those that are, this is one of many factors.
Is there a problem of kind of competing goods? Because you can cut demography in various different ways, right? So you could choose to focus through a gender lens, or you could focus through an income lens, you could focus through a minority lens. Is that in any way an issue?
We can get into intersectionality, right? This is the conversation of our day, and unpack that. But I think we look at a gender lens not as a silo, but as something that crosses all investing and all impact. But so one of the conversations was one of the big ways that impacts investors may make going forward is in transportation, right? Public transportation. Well, interestingly, women use public transportation different than men do. So starting to understand that makes you a stronger impact investor. So gender goes through any particular way that you're making an impact investment.
By the way, this goes to that issue that it has to be a customized conversation with empathy. And we have clients that care about, animal welfare, gender lens investing, and climate change, but they don't care about munitions or tobacco or whatever. So it has to be a customized conversation where you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
Ron, from your perspective, you could make the decision with your own money to focus in this way. But what are the roadblocks that you see for investors, for asset owners?
I think one of the roadblocks is that, to what Jackie talked about earlier, people aren't really informed as to what gender lens investing is. And so I think that they make assumptions perhaps with very little information, that it's soft and it's pink, and that there's not as much rigor associated with it as traditional investments. And I can tell you from our perspective, we are not looking to have subpar returns in our portfolio. And in fact, I would argue that on both the public and private side, that in the people that we are investing with and the strategies that we're using, I believe have an opportunity for outperformance. I see that particularly on the private side. So until we just taught our whole team, my daughter, my wife, our portfolio director, Eric Stevenson, is also here. We taught a course on impact investing at Middlebury last month, and we included a segment on gender lens investing, and we went through Jackie's book, and we got a lot of the statistics that I really hadn't been fully aware of, such as how difficult it is for women entrepreneurs to get funding. And one of the reasons is that only about 3% of venture capitalists are women. So go figure, right? Men fund men. And so we have disproportionately had investments in women-led companies in our private equity portfolio, not because they're women, but because they're totally brilliant, kick-ass CEOs. They just happen to be women, and what's interesting is because we've begun to get a reputation in the segments that we invest in, that we're investing in women-owned companies, women who have had difficulty getting funding traditionally have come to us, and it's been this wonderful deal flow opportunity to see really brilliant business models that we might not otherwise have seen. So to me, it's a virtuous circle. It's not about giving up return, it's about putting ourselves in a position where we can outperform and invest in women at the same time.
Jackie.
So just to follow up, though, on what Ron said here, because he may not be taking enough credit for the work that they're doing. They just happen to be women entrepreneurs in our portfolio. Sometimes that doesn't just happen if one doesn't put themselves in the flow and the networks where you're going to be meeting said entrepreneurs. The research from Harvard Business School is if you give investors, male or female, trained investors, a pitch deck and an actor voiceover, male voice and female voice, both men and women are 60% more likely to invest in the male voice than the female voice. All other information kept the same. So there is an aspect of implicit bias that folks like the Cordes Foundation are overcoming in finding those investments.
By the way, there's a woman named Michelle Bongiovanni. Her company is called Heal Our World, and she comes from Dun & Bradstreet. And she's looking at the performance characteristics of private companies that are run by women. And again, it's just another empirical example that women-owned companies seem to outperform. If you want to talk about a women-owned company, come talk to me after that.
Let's throw it open at this point. If anyone got any questions, yes, there's a hand up here. Can we get the mic to that side of the room?
While you're getting the mic, I'm going to give you another good quote. Margaret Thatcher, as long as we're with the Brits, said, if you want something said, give it to a man. If you want something done, give it to a woman.
My name is Stacy Warden, and I run the Center for Financial Markets at the Milken Institute. And Mike Milken, our founder, he made a lot of money, I think, by having kind of two fundamental insights. One was that, if the coupon is higher than the risk premium, you can still make money. So it doesn't have to be investment grade. It can be a high yield instrument. And the second is that, fundamentally, he just was not like racist or sexist. And this is back in the 70s. He was too kind of numeric, and he just looked at numbers. And he funded, Jewish people and Australians and women and the first African-American billionaire. And so, I think he's a very sort of naturally moral guy, but he also, I think, spotted an opportunity there. And I don't think that I'm particularly persuaded that women make better investors or women are better CEOs. I buy the diversity point for sure. Diversity is important. But I wonder if maybe some of the main, the main value proposition is that this is still an understood asset and a biased asset, and you can pick up things on the ground that people are not missing. And nirvana for an investor is when perception of risk is higher than risk, and maybe just perception of risk is higher with women. A woman-owned chemical company or something, women shouldn't be running chemical companies. There's an implicit bias against things like that. So I wonder how much of that is baked into what you're how you're approaching this.
Who wants to take that?
I can start. Just as an example, another example, Stevie Cohen from SAC Capital. So whatever you think about big hedge funds, so be it. But like Michael, Steve understood certain things. In fact, he was one of the ones that fought most intensely with Andrew Cuomo to get LGBT rights, same-sex marriage in New York. And when that right was granted, I sent Steve just a quick email. I sent it with a picture of my wife and my 3 kids. And I said, Steve, thank you for helping us be able to marry. And he replied back and simply said, principles matter. Talk soon, Erika. Principles matter. And so it's the same point. Quantitative analysis matters. Principles matter. And one day, I do think that in terms of inclusiveness and diversity, we'll be further along to being able to have both the empirical evidence and the framework and principles that are going to have real progress. But over to you, Jackie.
So I guess I would say yes and. So there is an aspect of this that is absolutely mispriced risk, right? And this aspect that maybe the entrepreneurs are overlooked, the women executives have to be twice as good to get to the top, et cetera. But in a day and age where active managers are looking for any kind of signal for outperformance, it's fascinating that whether it's Morgan Stanley or Robeco Sam or BlackRock, everybody's doing this analysis saying that there are correlations out there. So to me, I kind of go, well, that's interesting. And part of it is, I believe globally, the economic power of women is growing faster than we as investors understand. And so that aspect of the shift, not just in the US of educated women, but globally what the MDGs did, what the SDGs are going to do, the shift in legal status and rights. 65 countries in the last 2 years changed the legal status and rights for women in terms of their economic participation. All of that matters to companies that are operating around the world, and those that, as Erika said, have been thinking more inclusively about that diversity earlier are going to find new markets, find new products, and so forth. And then lastly, there's a lot going on in terms of gendered data. So this is harder to get your hands around, but think about software. Microsoft's got a whole lot of work going on around the gendered aspects of software development and how to create software that doesn't have gendered biases. And there's lots of other work in that space, but those companies that are using gendered analysis in terms of data and products that then better work for all of us, it's not creating pink products, it's creating products that better work for everyone.
Ron, anything you want to add?
You guys are a tough act to follow. So I would just say, maybe getting back to what we do on the private side, I guess I've become convinced over the past few years that in the absence of anything else, 3 guys with a second-rate business plan can get traditional VC funding easier than 3 women with a first-rate business plan. And so I look at, the comment about Mike Milken and increasing the aperture of the types of investments he would look at. I feel like the focus that we have today on women entrepreneurs gets us a seat at tables that we wouldn't have had an opportunity to have seen before because other venture capital firms and others would have taken that investment before it might ever have come to us. And I'm just reminded, there's this great story of the vintner who was taking someone to show him the vines on his property. And there's one area where the vines are just like feet higher than everywhere else. And it's like, well, why did it happen that those grew so well? And he said, well, it just so happened that when these vines were small, they had a much more difficult time accessing water. So the roots had to grow a lot stronger, and the trees have subsequently flourished. And I feel like the same thing is happening with the investments we're making in the private space. That it's unfortunate that women don't have the same opportunity as men to get traditional VC funding, but boy, the ones that are coming to us have built really strong business plans, are great entrepreneurs, and I think the fact that they've had some difficulties in raising capital has forced them to sharpen their game, and they're bringing first-rate business plans. The other thing I'll say is that if I had 3 business plans from women and 3 from men, the hockey sticks are higher over here. Right, the hockey sticks that nobody believes to begin with, right? 3 guys put together a business plan, it goes like this, right? 3 women put together a business plan and they're more circumspect, but what I've found is that their odds of actually coming close to meeting their plan are significantly higher.
Unfortunately, time is very short on this, but I want to come to each of you with a kind of, what do you do next question, right? If everyone listens to this and finds it persuasive, what's your next step in order to put this into action? And perhaps, Erika, if you start and come back towards me.
Well, from a personal standpoint, I think about, success simply breeds success. So, for our firm, we are a purpose-built, research-driven advisor. And so if we can be successful, it's going to show a lot of things. It's going to show a new business model in the world of wealth and investment management. It's going to show that a woman-owned and controlled enterprise can do, as Ron is talking. It's going to show that there's room for everybody when we're talking about we're growing a pie, right? So if we talk about, $52 trillion, according to the World Economic Forum, that's going to transfer hands over the next generation, there's room for everybody. And so I think that is kind of a positive message. And again, all the things we talked about before, better measures, better metrics, raising consciousness, all of that.
Jackie?
So nobody can do everything and everybody can do something. And so where I would say is take one thing that you heard up here that fits with your particular situation, your passion, the way that you see the economy going, and decide to take a step. And that could be as simple as starting to ask more questions in your due diligence. It could be asking your investment advisor, how is it that my portfolio has exposure to the growing economic power of women? It could be in investing in one of the very many, Ron mentioned some, but Include is here. They have a gender lens fund. There's a whole other folks in the room who do, right? So there's no shortage of, if you want to start moving money today, you do not have to wait. We're tracking about 30 funds that have focused on women entrepreneurs or inclusive teams. So lots of things going on, but pick something. It doesn't have to be moving money right away, but at least start being curious about the space, because it will only do you well.
And I guess as an asset owner, I would just leave it that I suspect that there are a lot of product creators in this room, particularly in the public equity and debt side of the equation with all the major institutions represented. And we are 100% invested for impact in the foundation, but we're not yet 100% gender lens. And that's because even though we're in the main asset categories, there's a lot of sub-asset categories that we just haven't yet found gender lens solutions that make sense. So there is room for a lot of development here, and I would encourage firms to take a look at whatever it is that you do well and how it might be possible to apply a gender lens strategy to that.
We are unfortunately out of time, and that was really fascinating, if brief, introduction to gender lens investing, and I hope we come back to it in future events. Could everyone join me in thanking Jackie, Ron, and Erika?